Ignore the corruption, ignore the violence. Julius Malema is finally going to jail thanks to this new piece of legislation signed by the President of South Africa.
So this is the news that the Ramaphosa has finally signed the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill into law. Now, the president was told numerous times by various parties, you probably shouldn't sign this. It's a bit wide. He signed it anyway, because, election laws and stuff. Anyway, apparently what it actually does is it brings our obligations around hate speech, or speech we love to hate, in line with the Constitution and, I hear you say it, international human rights, whatever that is. Anyway, this actually revolves around racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and intolerance to a specific kind of group or idea. Now, that's important because if you think about it, how tolerant is Julius?
Well, think about it this way, right? The offense of hate speech is literally applying to any person who intentionally publishes, propagates, advocates, shares, or communicates anything to one or more people in a manner that could reasonably be construed to demonstrate a clear intention to be harmful or to incite harm, and to promote or propagate hatred based on defined grounds, one of those grounds being race. So when Julius Malema says, we're going to cut the throat of whiteness, or when he says he's not afraid of any pink pigs, or when he says, I don't know, we're going to take all your land because you're white, that seems to me, Byron, a quintessential definition of hate speech, according to this piece of legislation. So I know we sort of like to think we're free speech absolutists, but in this case, I'm actually for this because I think Julius Malema is going to go to jail if he continues the way he does.
Yes, now, interestingly, a number of, let's call them white political parties, using the mainstream media's view, people like Freedom Front Plus and the DA, which have a lot of non-white people in them. But anyway, these white political parties, if you want to call them that, they did say that this seemed like it was curtailing speech. And the president and the ANC did actually say, you guys should probably like this because it actually gives you powers against people espousing intolerant views, like the ANC, with Bella bills and stuff. Anyway, if you actually think about it, and you actually use this piece of legislation properly, it is actually a really good piece of legislation when it comes through to all of the perceived hatred against ethnic minorities in the country. Because the act actually says that all you have to prove is that it would be reasonable. And that, subjective. It's based on, what do we all think? Is this reasonable? And it would be reasonable to construe that the actions were harmful, intended to incite harm, or propagate hatred based on defined grounds. Well, a lot of what the EFF does in the ANC basically promotes or propagates hatred to ethnic minorities. And remember, this is the test of reasonableness, Ramon. So it's not really what I intend. It's what are the consequences. And reasonably, when we listen to that, would it be fair to say that this was inciting hatred? And I think some people with some of the utterances that do go on in the public probably would agree, probably is reasonable to assume that this would incite hatred. Do you not agree?
It seems to me like this is a sort of political party funding act all over again. So the ANC put this act into play, and it was really to justify the political parties in the opposition, just trying to find out who funded them and to maybe take some area of control away by explaining to people, listen, these political parties are funded by these people. It's a problem we can sort of boycott. But what has happened instead is that the ANC has found itself without any donors whatsoever because it's the ANC, which is the toxic brand. So they're scrambling for money. They have to go to the ICJ for Iran to give them R1 billion to run an election campaign. And that's been a bit of a nightmare for them. In this instance, I think what the ANC is trying to do in terms of this act is to take action against racist whites or racist Afrikaners or whatever the case might be. But at the end of the day, I think this will be used against them over and over and over again. And yeah, it's a real case of karma comes back to bite you. I'm not too sure Cyril knows exactly how this is going to hurt him in the long run.
So I hear you say, ladies and gentlemen, are we going to prison for hate speech? Because we often say speech that they love to hate. Well, I'm not sure that we are, Ramon, because there are actually exclusions from the Act. And the exclusions are artistic creativity, academic or scientific inquiry, fair and accurate reporting or commentary in the public interest, that's us, or interpretation and articulation or espousing of religious convictions, tenets, beliefs, teachings, doctrines, or writings that does not advocate hatred or constitutes incitement to cause harm. So effectively, you can say things like Christ is king, because he is. But I suppose if you actually call for jihadi, yeah, that might be incitement to cause harm. And so that might technically be causing hatred. Who knows? Anyway, I mean, you guys should all feel very secure in this because apparently news is that SAPs are going to get training on this, and so will the MPA. And we all know how great the training is, and we all know that nothing could go wrong in this process. Don't you agree, Ramon?
I mean, there's also a tinge of liberal tyranny here where this act could be used to literally take out the opponents of the regime. And because it's such an easy thing to prove, oh, look at this WhatsApp group with, I don't know, a racist meme somewhere. Oh, who sent it? Oh, this guy. Okay, let's find him through SARS records and then go kick his door in and arrest him. Like, it's so easy to actually have this as a means to take away opponents of the regime. But on the other hand, it's also a quiver. But on the other hand, it's also an arrow in our quiver. We can use it against the state and people in the state to sort of invalidate their speech as well. So it goes both ways. We know which way the MPA will go. They'll go with the state rather than against it. But then again, if we can't call out that hypocrisy, what's the point of hate speech then? I am for this because even though we can't stop it, we can certainly use it against our enemies.
Yes, and so for some of those of you who are sitting looking at this and going, you guys are talking rubbish, because we get a lot of that, we actually want to give you an example of this. So Scotland actually recently put in process its own hate crime bill, and the Prime Minister, Hamza Yusuf, was actually the most reported guy to government for hate crime because of his infamous Scotland's full of white people. And that video got a shed load of views and a shed load of complaints. And ultimately, this led to Hamza himself being toppled as PM. And he basically lost his position as First Minister of Scotland. Unintended consequences on an act that everybody told him not to sign. But he did it anyway, because he thought it would silence his political opponents. It didn't, it silenced him. And remind you very rightly to use that as an example to show that here's a piece of legislation that may actually have the unintended consequence of being used against the ANC in a way that it didn't quite perceive.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to see those EFF bots on Twitter go to jail and be exposed for being the racist little shits they really are. So, for once, we actually praise the ANC, not because they're great, but because they are supremely retarded. And that, my friends, is fair cop. It is. You can't.